He was the last Indian tribesman who struggled in the modern wilderness. He came from the woods, and nobody knew his real name. A starving Indian tribal man in a loincloth carrying a bow and quiver walked to a corral outside of Oroville in Northern California. But how did he reach there? On August 20th, 1911, as the local sheriff handcuffed him, he smiled. No one knew he would become famous as the last wild Indian in America. He was believed to be the last of his tribe. If he was treated like an exhibition piece, then how did he survive so many years? Anthropologists wanted to study him, and children wanted to see him make bows and arrows. But Ishi could never adjust to the new way of life. He never had a name of his own, so everyone called him Ishi. He became famous after he traveled from his native area in the foothills of California and was found huddled in a corral close to the town of Oroville because they were the last Native Americans to live freely in the West. His tribe, the Yahi, was said to have disappeared decades before. His grandparents had lived in the stunning region that would one day become Northern California for tens of thousands of years, surrounded by mountains, meadows rich in berries, nuts, and bulbs, woods full of prosperous people. But as whites flooded into their ancestral land, they were ended, first by disease and then by guns. The Yahi and its parent tribe, the Yeni, were almost completely wiped out during the 19th century human destruction in California. Ishi was 5 years old in 1865 when the Three Knolls Massacre occurred, resulting in the demise of 40 members of the tribe. There were only 33 who made it out alive, and half of them were ended by cattlemen. For the next 44 years, Ishi and his family, together with the few surviving Yahi, lived in hiding in the highlands. Surveyors discovered a camp in 1908 that included 2 elderly men and 2 elderly ladies. They were his mother, uncle, sister, and Ishi. They fled, but Ishi's mother was very old and ailing and passed away. The surveyors robbed the camp. Ishi spent 3 more years living in the bush. But when his sister and uncle passed, and forest fires destroyed much of the region, Ishi started to hunger due to a lack of food and wildlife. Almost famished, Ishi made the decision to make his way out of the mountainous area and into a white community with a butcher house. Before long, tourists were traveling from distant places, and the sheriff had the Yeni Indian on display like a strange exhibit piece. University of California at Berkeley anthropology professors learned about the sheriff's exhibit. Professor Alfred L. Kroeber removed the Yeni Indian from the jail and brought him to the university to live, and not surprisingly, to be studied and exhibited. When Kroeber asked for his name, the Indian replied, "I have none," because there were no people to name me. According to Yahi custom, others had to introduce him to strangers. So Kroeber named him Ishi, which meant man in the Yeni mother tongue. Ishi did a surprising amount of adjusting to city life. He saw planes, rode trolleys, worked as a custodian, watched surgeries, and enjoyed ice cream. However, there were darker aspects to his story. Kroeber was taken aback by Ishi's self-assurance and independence. The audience that came to see him was fascinated, and his demonstrations were more like instructional events than funfair acts. Ishi explained to Kroeber that he enjoyed teaching white people because he saw them as sophisticated children, smart but not wise. His home was actually a museum, and he was for a time put on display. New to modern life, he soon contracted tuberculosis and passed away. Fewer than 5 years after he arrived, Ishi had asked for his body to be preserved for the afterlife and for his Yahi funerary customs to be honored. Despite his friends' best efforts to honor his desires, the medical school conducted an autopsy. Following an autopsy, his brain was extracted from his body and sent to the Smithsonian, where it remained for many years, until being given back to the Pitriver tribe for a traditional burial. More than just the last wild Indian, Ishi was much more. He was a guy who had stared into the abyss of loneliness and extermination, and had managed to come out of it with his senses and mind intact. He had been able to adjust as best he could to the world that had ended his. He was far more suited to civilization than it was to him.